Holy Gospel according to Luke. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. From Denmark comes a story of two kings. One was visiting the land of the other. And the host king then points to a high tower that was part of the fortification of his castle. And he says to his guest, "See that tower over there? My power is such that I can command any of my subjects to climb to the top of it and jump to their death, and they will obey me." Well, the other king then pointed out a small, humble dwelling that was there near the castle. And he says, "See that home over there? I can knock on the door of such a dwelling in my kingdom and be welcomed. My power is such that I can stay overnight, sleep well, and never fear for my safety." Now, which of these two kingdoms would you like to live in? Over the years, I've had conversations with people who are uncomfortable with calling Christ the King, or even using the title Lord. I believe that the actual stumbling block for them is their association with how human rulers have used domination as the power behind their position, like that host king in my story. But Christ's kingdom isn't based on domination and threat. It's just the opposite. Christ's reign in our world and in our lives happens through the transforming power of love. Today we see Christ's throne is on a cross. And to proclaim him king is to live a cruciform way of life ourselves. When we proclaim Christ as king, we surrender our need to be in control. We let go of our need for certainty and embrace mystery. With Christ as our king, we fall into that wellspring of peace that passes all understanding. The power of Christ the King isn't a domination over, but rather a shared power. As that wonderful ancient hymn that we heard Steve read this morning from Colossians puts it, all things hold together in him. To proclaim Christ as King is to have that power of love at work in and through us. It's what connects us to the very source of love. Christ's reign over us and over all creation reconciles and heals. Christ's reign brings a whole new way of being, a whole new reality. And if we try to fit the whole idea of Christ the King into our current and historical reality of how many rulers function, I really can't fault anyone for their hesitation at proclaiming Christ as King. Now, this festival day, Christ the King, was one of the last to be added to our liturgical calendar. It's not even 100 years old yet. For it was in 1925 that Pope Pius XI instituted it in response to his concern about the nationalistic and secular tendencies he saw in Europe in the wake of World War I. I think he intuited the need for us Christians, and maybe even for all citizens in the world, to remember that Christ is over us and the ultimate ruler of all creation. This remains so crucial as nations continue to wage war, and we human beings continue in practices that harm the health of our planet. Last week, I had the opportunity to hold my 3-month-old grandson, and as I did, I told him that I hoped we all could change our ways sufficiently for him and his offspring to live on a planet that sustains abundant life for all. As Christians, we can lead the way if we let Christ's reign of love be our guide. We may pray for a reduction in gun violence, but can you imagine a world in which shooting another human being is just unthinkable? And what if all the money spent worldwide on military might was spent to transition us off of the fossil fuels we use to generate energy, propel our boats and planes and cars? If love fully reigns, then we will live in a different reality from the one we now inhabit. What new kind of economic system would support this reign of love that recognizes how we are all connected, not only to every other person, but also every other plant, animal, and even inanimate things? And what other systems and structures would need to be radically changed? In our gospel, as Jesus is crucified, the notion that he is God's messianic king is mocked. And there was one particular phrase in that gospel that really caught my attention. It was simply, "The people stood by watching." We, the people, can no longer stand on the sidelines. We first need to follow the example of one of those who was crucified with him on a cross right next door. For he recognized how Jesus really is a king. He seemed to sense that by dying on a cross, Jesus would establish his reign of love. And that simple request, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." What a request to make at a moment like that. He sees what no one else there can see. What a sacred and holy exchange, as Jesus then promises that they will be together in paradise. Well, you know what? We too share in this unity with the one who is Christ the King. We too can experience sacred moments of intimate connection with the divine. Jesus' promise to that criminal is true for us as well. He is present with us right here today in water and word, in bread and wine. And through that connection, we're guided to live in and under his eternal reign of love. In the Hindu tradition, there's a story about a great king called Shibi. He was a very kind and charitable king and thus became very famous. His fame spread over all the earth and even into the heavens. Well, the Lord of heaven, Indra, wanted to test and see if King Shibi was really as compassionate as his fame proclaimed him to be. So Indra and the fire god Agni left heaven. Agni assumed the form of a dove and Indra of a fierce hawk. Agni flew in the front, fluttering her wings as though terrified, and Indra followed at a distance as if in hot pursuit. They flew straight into the palace of the king, and Shibi was in the garden distributing food to the poor. The little fluttering, frightened dove came and perched on his wrist, looking at him with her tearful eyes, full of fear. Well, Shibi immediately took her into his hands and stroked her back kindly and said, "Well, fear not, O little dove, I will save you from all harm." And just as he was saying this, the hawk came diving in and tried to snatch the dove away from the king's hand. But the king raised his arm to obstruct the hawk. Well, the hawk landed on a nearby bush, looked at the king angrily, and then said, speaking like a human, "This dove is my bird of prey. I have been pursuing it all morning long. Why do you obstruct me in obtaining my food, O king?" Well, surprised at hearing the hawk speak like a man, Shibi replied, "I do not know who you are, O hawk, who speaks like a man. But this poor, frightened dove sought my shelter. It's my duty to protect her from all harm. I won't allow you to snatch her away from me and make her your prey." The hawk then said, "Well, O king, you are renowned as a kind and just one. Perhaps it is your duty to protect those in distress. But is your kindness limited only to this little dove? What about me? Am I not equally entitled to claim your pity? I am a bird who can only live by eating the meat of small birds. By depriving me of my food, are you not condemning me to die? Is this your desire?" Well, King Shibi was perplexed. The hawk could not only speak like a human, but could argue like one too. Evidently, his duty was towards both the dove and the hawk. He was very thoughtful. At last he said, "Well, hawk, what you say is true. I won't deprive you of your food, but I also can't give up this poor frightened dove. Will you accept if I give you some other flesh as a substitute?" Well, the hawk replied, "Very well, king. I have no objection as long as my hunger is satisfied. But you must give me flesh exactly equal to that of the dove. I won't accept less." And he further mockingly added, "But where do you get substitute flesh from? Will you kill another life to save the life of this dove?" Shibi replied, "No, I won't think of harming another life. I will give you my own flesh in the place of the dove." And then he turned to his attendants and ordered them to bring a balance, and they set the balance up before the king. Shibi placed the dove on one side of the balance in one dish, and it went down. And then he took out his sword, and he began cutting small portions of his own flesh and placing it on the other side. But strangely, the dove, which had looked so small and frail in that pan, couldn't outbalance it. King Shibi kept cutting portions of his body and placing it on balance, but to no avail. Till at last, there was no more flesh for him to cut. So wondering at the heaviness of the dove, Shibi then set down his sword and himself mounted the balance. And now the balance was quite equal on the scale. Rejoicing that he was at last able to give the hawk its due. Shibby turned to the hawk and said, "O hawk, my weight is equal to the weight of the dove. Please eat me and leave the dove alone." And as he said these words, there was cheering and applause from the gods who had gathered in the sky to witness the test. They beat the heavenly drums and showered flowers on the king. And then the hawk and the dove shed their assumed forms and stood before him in their shining, glorious forms. And Shibby just looked at them in amazement. And Indra said, "O kindly king, know that we are Indra and Agni, come down from heaven to test you. You have indeed proved yourself even greater than your fame. You will be blessed with long life and honor. Your name will remain in the world as long as the sun and moon remain." And so saying, Indra touched Shibby with his hands, and all the cuts and wounds vanished. And he stood there, healed, as strong as ever. Then he bowed to the gods with great devotion, who, after they blessed him, returned to their own abodes. I'm going to leave it up to you to make your own connections of that story with the story in our gospel of the one that we worship today as King. Samuel Torvin, professor emeritus at Pacific Lutheran, says this about this particular Sunday. This Jesus whom on this Sunday we praise as King is in fact like no other king that has ever reigned. For today, the gospel and the holy meal proclaim him King where we least expect it. In the depth of our yearning for life, our suffering, and our need. He is no ordinary king. Here in our struggle and desire to witness to his life and his love for us, he reigns. And here in the world, hidden in the struggle for justice and peace, here he reigns. The power of the cross surpasses all worldly notions of power. It reveals Christ not only as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but also unveils a whole new way to rule. Not through fear and domination, but with reconciling and healing through sacrificial love. Well, I, for one, want to live under Christ's reign in this kingdom, trusting in the ways that divine love reigns supreme. Amen.